Welcome to the Be Well at USASK podcast. My name's Peter Headley. I serve as a Director of Student Affairs and Services at the university. This podcast is for all members of the university community. Each week, members of the USASK community will join me to share ideas and provide guidance on all aspects of being well. And we'll be highlighting campus initiatives and resources designed to engage and support you. In these challenging times, we hope the ideas and information we share will help. In this episode, as part of our series focusing on mental health during Mental Health Week in May 2020, I'm going to be talking to Evan King, a registered social worker providing mental health support at the USASK Student Wellness Centre. We're going to be exploring how the COVID situation has affected people's substance use during social isolation, as well as what mindful strategies around substance use look like. Well, welcome to the podcast, Evan. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks. It's a good day to do something like this.
So can you start off by telling me about your role at the Student Wellness Centre and the work that you do in supporting student mental health?
Yeah, so I'm a registered social worker and I'm on the counseling team of the Student Wellness Centre. So we generate most of our referrals through outreach and intake, and also referrals from doctors and nurses depending on the circumstances. And our role is to provide one-to-one therapy with students who are struggling with stress, mental health concerns, and also sometimes substance use does come into that play as well. In that role, I also help manage the ADHD support education group, which is held once a semester with a variety of different professionals. And we're also working on generating some distance groups in the near future.
And so you're, at the moment, I'm talking to you from your home this morning, so you're carrying on delivering services from there right now.
Yeah, and it's actually going pretty smooth. So what we're offering right now are WebEx sessions, which is virtual video sessions, as well as phone call sessions and other supports. I mean, some of the work has changed. It's been a change for both the students and us, but we're trying to support with what we have, right? So a lot of students do find phone sessions just a little more smooth and easier to do. You don't set up the computer and everything, but there's also WebEx if they do want that ability to pick up on social cues and that kind of thing, which I personally find the sessions go smoother that way, but I always leave it up to the student. Also trying to support students who are in tough times, like sending them resources, different manuals and research-based education that they can work on independently if that's what they feel they need right now.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're hearing a lot about at the moment from a mental health standpoint, perhaps, related to our current situation, is the change in people's habits. And one of the key things being highlighted is the increase in substance use during social isolation, particularly alcohol. And a recent survey from the Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addictions indicated that 25% of Canadians aged between 35 and 54 had responded that they were drinking more at home due to the COVID-19 situation. What are your observations about what's happening at the moment with this and perhaps why it's happening?
Yeah, it's a situation right now that, especially for people with difficulties in coping and that are very sensitive to what's going around, this was a very unpredicted thing. If we reflect back on, what is it now, 5 weeks and going home and processing like how we adapted to it, even myself on an individual level, just being like sent from the campus to home, I was like, okay. And then 5 weeks later, just like processing everything that's going on, it can be overwhelming. I'm not surprised by those statistics. One of the main reasons, to put it simple, is boredom, right? So we're all bored and there's not as much of an opportunity to get out. We're kind of stuck in our houses or in the community or in society, but also social isolating. So boredom is a simple way to put it, but we can also look at other factors, which is quote unquote boredom, which is the lack of social support that we have right now, the lack of other coping mechanisms we have right now. Some people might have heard of this. I think it was discussed on some TED Talks, and it's something that's discussed a lot in substance use is the rat park study, which was done by Dr. Bruce Alexander. So what was that is he put rats with nothing in their cage, and he had water, and it was laced with cocaine and water that was plain, right? But there's nothing for them to do. They had no social interaction, no activities to complete, and the majority of the rats if not all, I cannot recall, it might have been all, they chose the cocaine or heroin laced water bottle. Then he took the same rats and created this rat park. So, it had the wheel, it had all sorts of like fun amusement parks, and the use of the cocaine bottle, the use of it greatly reduced. So that would be like a good thing to maybe reflect on what's going on with us, because we are isolated. We do have the benefit, of course, of being social and active people with that are able to access more of that, of course. But it is like a lot of our amusement, a lot of our coping for our mental health and well-being has been taken away from us right now.
So if there are listeners who are wondering whether they or maybe even a loved one is really having some struggles or even maybe an active addiction, is there a way for them to tell whether that's what it is? And are there ways in which they and their loved ones can access support at this time?
Oh, for sure. One of the primary ways that may get people wondering, like if something is going on, is, extreme changes to social behavior. Take a loved one, for example, that you do not live with or reside in. It's a remote situation, such as now during the pandemic, but you start to notice that they stop checking in as much. It's more difficult for you to get in touch with them. You find that even maybe their communication is coming at very like extreme hours of the day or night, 6 a.m., 3 a.m. And it's just behaviors that are not typical for that individual. So I think when we do look at behaviors and look at worrying about cared and loved ones, the positive thing is your loved ones and the people in your life, and to take an individualized look at it and take a look at their behaviors and see if they're changing.
It's certainly not an easy one for people to acknowledge their own difficulties or others. And I guess one of the most difficult things is actually that first conversation, either with yourself or with someone else, to say, is this an issue? And really being vulnerable enough to say, I think I need some help. How would you suggest navigating that type of conversation with self or a loved one?
It's a difficult situation for both the person struggling with the substance use as well as loved ones, right? Because it's a two-way street. The loved ones feel like maybe dismissed. They're not too sure how to respond to it. And sometimes, unfortunately, substance use can be perceived as selfishness, right? That, they're not attending and they're not being supportive and they're not being that family member that you're so used to having, that person that you can trust. Some tips that I would say is educate yourself and seek help for yourself. Get counseling to help yourself both support the individual that's struggling with the substance use, but also for yourself that's experiencing, that traumatic empathy of like seeing someone you care about so much going down a negative path and engaging in harmful behavior.
Despite the fact that addictions or substance use disorders are now recognized and diagnosable mental health conditions, there does still remain so much stigma around either gaining a diagnosis or accessing support. Why do you think that's the case? And is there anything we can do to remove some of that stigma and barriers to people getting the help they need to recover?
I think some of that is attached to the shame that is attached to individuals who struggle with substance use. I always think of the quote, it's the insulted to the injured. And that's a Dostoevsky quote. And it's people who struggle with substance use, they're hurting. There's something, they're trying to numb. They're going through very like psychological, physical, drastic changes during withdrawal and back up to baseline and then falling again. It can be a very vicious cycle. So I think empathy is a big point in this circumstance. It's also like something to note that substance use disorders, substance use struggles comes from people of all different backgrounds. It's not picky with who it chooses. I often hear about AA meetings with doctors and lawyers, and there's people from all different backgrounds. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, I know one of the most difficult things is just that, particularly if it's a loved one, how do you stay patient, particularly with the notion that, relapse is often part of the process for someone. So I'll just loop back to my last question. What kind of supports can people access for themselves or identify for loved ones if they are having difficulties with substance use?
So if you are a student, we're more than welcome to support you at the Student Wellness Centre. Like I said, you would just access intake and get connected with a counselor here, and we can have those tough decisions. A few tips in the moment is assertive communication, because family members and loved ones do need that sense of empowerment as well, and that their voice is being heard. If you're finding that you're struggling with a family member or loved one with addiction, to try and be gentle but assertive, so that, that perfect line in between passive and aggressive, right in the middle, assertive communication, using I statements to reflect how you're feeling and what you're seeing in their behaviors that are making you uncomfortable, and just ensuring that you're coming from a place of care, right? And a non-judgmental manner, which may cause, shame in the person struggling. There's sometimes we even see that in programs and treatment centers that are designed to help the addicted mind. Shame hasn't worked, and we've come a long ways from that. And it's more a gentle approach now in those centers. But, back in the 60s, where you get kicked out of these treatment centers if you did relapse, and then you're left with withdrawal symptoms on your own. Another thing to point out is the changes that can happen with the intoxication and then the withdrawal symptoms. So it's even interesting that when you're on the substance, you are making maybe irrational or disrupting your social relationships. But when you're going through withdrawal, and sometimes even individuals who maybe don't have a regular substance use, but even from as far as substance dependency to daily drinkers to even a weekend that you maybe went a little bit too far. And one thing I found is in working in some of these areas is people would come on Monday or Tuesday and be like, I'm really irritable. Everything that people are trying to talk to me about is just really agitating me. And I don't know why. And I get these feelings once or twice a month. And then further assessment, further conversations with them, we end up figuring out that they're experiencing withdrawal symptoms. They're having that irritability. They're having difficulties communicating. Their mind is a little bit foggy, and it makes it very difficult for them to act assertively with people in their lives.
I guess I just wanted to pick up on one thing you mentioned. You talked about students coming to the wellness center, and I've heard in the past that some students have had concerns about coming to talk to quote unquote the university about some substance use issues. Would you comment just about the confidentiality piece associated with that type of care and the knowledge that quote unquote the university would have?
So if it is a strictly addiction related situation, students actually can access mental health and addictions in the community. There is a specialized therapist there for their use. But we also do see individuals struggling with addiction because it very often is, if not always, attached to mental health and emotional dysregularity. But of course, when you do come to the wellness center, it's completely confidential. Everything you tell us, we wouldn't be telling academic supervisors or consulting with people in your community and in your classes without your prior consent. So if there was something that could help with some consultation and coordination that we talk about in session, we would get that consent. But no verbal or signed consent means that we don't have consent and that we would not talk to anyone outside of the wellness center.
That's great. And presumably, if you were engaging in care or wraparound care with a physician, that you would still require consent to share that with one of the family physicians.
Of course. And they also, students who come to our services also have the option to completely lock their files that, I want therapy completely separate from my medical treatment, from all the other treatments that I'm getting from the wellness center, and that's fine. Then we lock your file and have no communication between different professionals in the wellness center. And that can change. That if something changes and they do need that consult, we can always switch it back. It's client-centered care and just making sure that individuals feel safe in the services that we provide, so they can be open and vulnerable and work through what they're struggling with and gather a sense of resiliency.
Can we talk about mindful substance use versus sobriety? So, for example, how can people work out what's best suited for them?
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of individuals do kind of look at the pros and cons of each side. When we talk about sobriety, it's always a choice from the client that alcohol or any other substances has impacted my life so negatively that I just think I want it out of my life. I've tried tracking my drinking. I've tried moderating my drinking. I've tried all these different approaches, but it always ends up in the same dark and somber place, and I just want it out of my life. And then there's other students that with everything like substance use and even alcohol it's learning, and that concept of misuse. So why are we using the substance? Everybody enjoys like a drink with friends at the pub, or to let loose or to celebrate. But I think when we come to mindful drinking, it's asking ourselves why we want to indulge in that substance today. And if it is because of negative things that are happening, if it's because we find ourselves emotionally dysregulated, maybe it's mindful to acknowledge those feelings, tolerate them in the moment, reaffirming yourself that they will pass. These intense feelings are not permanent, but maybe alcohol or any other substance isn't a safe option right now.
So can you suggest some ways in which people can cope with substance use issues during social isolation? I'm particularly thinking about the fact that certain facilities like gyms, which people often use as part of a coping strategy, are currently closed. Are there things that people can be doing to support themselves in different ways?
Yeah, it's difficult that some of our coping is a way, and exercise, it's a huge coping for all of us. But finding home workouts is good. It's getting nicer out. There are other things that we can do. When it comes to substance use or misuse in general, like there is an app, and it's called Sobriety Time. And it's not necessarily based for someone who wants to completely have alcohol out of your life, but it is like a goal-based app that's like, if you do find your use is getting to a state that you're uncomfortable with during the pandemic, during the isolation here, it's a good like goal-setting app to make sure that you keep on the track that you want to be. So, for example, if you want to limit yourself to having a couple beverages on Saturday, then it has a countdown. It reminds you of the positive things. You can have a journal in there, and it reminds you of the reasons why you want to limit yourself to this schedule. So it gives you that structure and routine that maybe you're missing with not, attending work, with not being out and about as much, even your gym routine, like you said, Peter. So that's some things to reflect on. Also, a lot of us do have a lot more time on our hands, and maybe looking back at, those other coping and those other hobbies that we've taken a back step on because our lives have gotten too busy. So, if you used to play clarinet, pick up your clarinet and play. If you used to draw or write short stories, and bring back that creative side and that creative piece to you that will give you that sense of like positivity and well-being.
Well, maybe that's a great segue. So this week is Mental Health Week, and I'm asking all the guests to share one thing that they're doing right now to be well, maybe something that brings them joy, or, as you say, an expression of creativity. What would be that thing for you, and how are you finding that helps?
Probably just like many other people. I started this pandemic and was like, wow, there's, your life is going to change a lot. And I started to examine like what I could do. For me personally, I'm really into like my yard and gardening. So I've like really been working on that outside. I've been enjoying the sun, sanded my deck, did all those kind of things around the house. And then I kind of got into barbecuing too. So I got like a nice charcoal grill and barbecue, and then you can share with loved ones and your family and friends. And so that's kind of nice. I do try and keep some exercise in my life, and I have a rowing machine and some kettlebells, but and I feel pretty good with that. Yeah, just trying to make sure that I have balance in my day, because when we get shocked with a new reality, sometimes it's like you're not sure what to do. And it does take some mindful thinking and mindful thought of what you want your days to look like.
Yeah, I must admit, I hit the yard myself this weekend and did some cleaning up. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I have been fairly sore this week, which suddenly reminds me that I'm getting older. So, yeah. I did not, however, sand my deck.
Well, I'll tell you, it's hard on the lungs. I've never done it before, and my neighbor came out and he's like, "That's enough for today, man. You're it's hard on the lungs." And I was like, okay. I thought so. I thought it was time to quit today.
So is there a final thought that you'd want to leave listeners with, either about substance use or something else?
I think connected to substance use and even mental health, like that loss of control, that feeling of losing control of our life and our emotions, it can be a really difficult thing. I like to focus on, resiliency is a piece to think about, when it comes to alcohol, substance use, or anything in our lives. Like it can go from like overworking or over exercising or overthinking, which many of us do, right? Just be empowered and try and take control of that. And if you find yourself struggling, be vulnerable and talk to family or friends or a professional, because we are resilient human beings. We all have our narrative. We all have our stories. We've all gone through difficult times in our life. And if you can reflect on and give yourself a little bit of credit for getting through those difficult times in your life, or, something that you accomplished, right? Even talking to students sometimes, like not everybody comes to university, and that's a really good thing and to reflect on, and it's an accomplishment in your life. I also try to think about gratitude exercises. Doesn't have to be anything special or taxing every day, or it can be, Sometimes I have clients that, paint pictures or draw pictures about something that they feel grateful for that day. And that's awesome because they're able to express themselves in an artistic manner. They feel proud of their piece, and they're also expressing something that they feel happy for. I'm not very creative, and sometimes I just try and think about something I did well that day, whether it was I didn't burn the barbecue or I didn't kill the plants by accident, or I got that workout in, and just reflecting on something that went well. We often find ourselves, focusing on things that they wish they did better in the day, but there's also a lot of things that you did well. In my first session with students, I always give them the free one. I always say, well, you took care of your mental health by coming to your counseling appointment. There's a freebie, and then you start tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think a lot of what I hear you talking about is also about perspective as well. And it's often difficult to have that kind of perspective. And in terms of my own gratitude exercise, Evan, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time in between appointments to talk with me today.
Okay, thanks, Peter. It was good to catch up. My office is across from Peter, so I haven't seen him in a while.
That's true. Yeah, we are corridor buddies. That's true.
All right. Thank you. You take care.
Thanks for listening to the Be Well at USASK podcast with me, Peter Headley. And thanks again to Evan for joining me and sharing. Students can connect with Evan and the rest of the Student Wellness Centre team through the contact details and links in the down bar. New clients need a referral from the mental health intake to access the counselling therapy team. Please check in again for further episodes and more content related to being well. Please subscribe and share this podcast. You can find us on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'd also love to hear from you, so please post comments and questions, and we'll look to include them in future episodes. Also, if there's someone you'd like to see as a guest or a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Fatima Kuvadia, who's the Sunni Muslim faith leader at the University of Saskatchewan. We're going to be talking about how the COVID-19 situation has changed the lives of Muslims, especially during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, which has just started. So, until next time, stay safe and be well.